What does anybody remember what we talked about last week? Mennonites. I wasn't here, so what did we talk about? About Mennonites. They're great. Mennonites are great. That's what we learned. Yes, we do nothing wrong. We are the pure church. Is that what I'm hearing? What else besides that we're the pure church? Was there any reality in our teaching last Sunday? Yep. So the Mennonites keep breaking off and getting more and more pure as we go. That's what I'm hearing. Amen. Yeah, exactly. Fun fact about this, because this is what we're going to talk about today a little bit, is that is not exclusive to Mennonites. That is exclusive to humanity, I would say. And we're going to look at that a little bit more today. But before we begin, we're going to do my world-famous church history quiz. It's world famous. It's because everybody does this quiz, because it's the standard timeline of history when it comes to churches. So, flip your handout over, and let's see if we can nail a few of these. We're going to pound these into your head until you can say it in your sleep, and upside down, and right side up. So what happened in 33 AD? Jesus was crucified. This is number one. If you don't get this, well, now you have it. What happened in 325 AD? Evan can't answer. Sorry, say that again. The Emperor Constantine became a Christian. That was in 300, but it wasn't specifically this year. But that's good. Anyway, it starts with an N. The Council of Nicaea. And yeah, if you do want to remember this, Saint Nick punched somebody in the face or slapped somebody. That's the legend. So if you want to know, the 325 is when Santa was not a pacifist. What happened 800 AD? And then bonus points, why this is important. 800 AD. Yes. What happened to Charlemagne? Who crowned Charlemagne? The Pope crowned Charlemagne. So what kind of solidified in that moment? Church and state got together. Yep. The power in the church. Okay, what happened in 1054? 1054, not another council, no. There's a ton of councils, but that wasn't. And I'll give you the hint. It had to do with the filioque. Just to give you that Latin phrase, because we all know Latin here, which means from the sun. What happened in 1054? Something very great. The great, not the Reformation, that comes. The West and East. Yes, what happened in the West and East? It was called the Great Schism. Yes, well done. Yeah. And then, 500 years later, another great divide happened. In 1517, what was that? Luther nailed Catholicism to the wall. That's the Protestant perspective. Yes, the Reformation. So what happened in 333 AD? Yep. What happened in 325? Council of Nicaea. What happened in 800? Church and state got together. How? Yes. 1054. The Great Schism. 1517. Reformation. Let's go. Okay. Today we're talking about the Puritans. Who's heard of the Puritans or the word Puritan? About half of you. Fantastic. This is an interesting time in history that we are going to talk about, and I actually really struggled to nail down what to talk about, because so much happens in such a small amount of time. And so I'm just going to, I found kind of a thread that we're going to follow, and I'm going to do some kind of general stuff, but there is so much more here that you could dig into that I'm going to let you guys do that. But so we're going to just think of this as kind of just an overview. Part of why it's a struggle is because what is happening right now with the Puritans you see at the top of your page, it says the timeline there, 1560 to 1660, that's 100 years. There is a lot going on in Europe. A lot going on in Europe. This place fighting that place who is Catholic and Protestant, but then they turn Protestant and then become Catholic, and people killing each other, and then it is just chaos. And all of these things play into what's going on with the Puritans, and so it's kind of tough for me to just go, this is the Puritan movement, this is what it means. I'm just going to kind of weave my way through it. One thing that you're going to know, and this was mentioned with the Mennonites, so the Mennonites kept breaking off and becoming purer. You're going to find a similar theme in this time period with the Puritans. I wonder why they got named that. And it's because, as Protestants, we are, if we're going to put an identity on a Protestant, it would be this. That is, we are an ever-reforming church. That's sometimes we can think of Protestantism as against. It's literally Protestants means to be protest. We're protesting something. And so almost our identity is what we're against, not so much what we are for. But in reality, if you want to think of what Protestants are for, they're forever reforming. We're always reforming. We're always going back to the Bible. We're always trying to adjust ourselves because we understand that culture plays into how we do church, how we interact with people, and it just inevitably leaks into our church. There's no way for us, if we're going to minister to the church or to the world, there's no way for the church not to incorporate and just have some of the world leak in. And so as a Protestant, the beauty and the emphasis is we are ever reforming. We are ever going back to the Bible. We're always using the Bible to reframe and refocus ourselves on who Christ is. And so this is something, sometimes we see all these we're trying to get pure and we're trying to divide and all this. And you can kind of see that as a criticism. And in one sense, it's a criticism, but in another sense, it's actually quite beautiful because in this division, we're always willing to reform our ideas, to change our ideas based on what the Bible says, to hopefully maintain that purity as we go forward, if that makes sense. Okay, so the way we're going to do the Puritans is we're going to break it up into the monarchs of England. The monarchs of England. And the reason being is because the Puritans come from the Church of England. Have we talked about the Church of England yet? We have not talked about the Church of England. Me and Jordan were planning to, but then we decided to change up some of the scheduling because some things didn't work out. And so we haven't talked about the Church of England, but they were part of the Reformation. And so what I'm going to do is just kind of walk through a little bit high level of the Church of England, and that's just going to lead us right into the Puritans, and we're just going to go via the monarchs. And the reason why we're going to go the monarchs is because of how the Church of England got started. Does anybody know how the Church of England got started? So this would have been right around the Reformation era. Oh, our handout tells us, I guess.
Oh, I didn't read the handout, but I'm thinking it has to do something with a king who wants to get a divorce. And
Yes.
So he starts a new church.
Yes, King Henry the 8th. Yeah. King Henry VIII. And so he got married, and then he wanted a divorce. Why did he want a divorce? His wife didn't have a baby. Yeah, he was really struggling to get an heir. And as superstitious and all that we were back in those days, right? He needed to find another woman to procreate with so that he can find an heir. And he needed a divorce from the woman that he was currently married. And the Catholic Church said, no. And so he was like, okay, the Catholic Church says no, but there's this guy over here named Martin Luther who's, making some radical moves. Maybe he would say yes. And so maybe I should become Protestant so that I can legally divorce my wife, marry somebody else, and hopefully have an heir. And so, fun fact, that is what he did. He separated from the Catholic Church and made himself head of a church, the Church of England. And so that is where this, very high level, very fast, that's where the Church of England comes from. That in itself deserves its own lesson, but that's not what we're doing today. So King Henry VIII essentially pulled himself and England out of the Catholics, created the Church of England with him as a head. Which is actually kind of interesting because the Church of England, we've looked through church history and we've seen how when the popes run the government and when the church runs the government, there tends to be issues, right? And so now we're in the point of, okay, we're breaking from this. What does this look like? And so we've looked at like Mennonites and different denominations from the Protestants. And the Church of England decided, you know what, if popes and the church really struggle to run the government, why doesn't the government run the church? Let's try that for a shot. And so the monarchs in the Church of England, they're the heads. They are the heads of the church. And it actually still is that way to this day. They are technically the heads of the church. And they kind of rule the church. Is that a good or a bad thing? It is a thing. Yeah. It's like the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Calling them back. Yep. So, what do you think the Church of England looked like if Henry pulled themselves out of Catholicism and started his own church? Do you think they went radically one way off from Catholicism, or do you think they kind of just kept the same thing or kept very similar ideas and just changed the authority structure? Similar ideas, yes. So the Church of England, have you ever heard this idea of high church, low church? Yeah, high church, low church. So what that means is high church is a church that has a high emphasis on liturgy, on the church itself, on the building. This is very superficial, but I'm trying to get this point across. They're very structure-oriented. And so if you think of Protestantism, so we have the top here is the high church. Church of England is like right at the top. They're very high church, very high church. After that would come like Lutheranism. That's another high church model. And then we get kind of like a Congregationalist Presbyterian church. And then as we get lower, we get like Baptists, and then like Mennonites, and then like non-denominational. Right? So that's, and I'm not actually stating in that who's better or worse. I'm just literally just stating what their view of the church is, right? The church building, how we do liturgy, things like that. So the Church of England is very high church. So Henry did his thing, pulled away, rocked on. Then his son Edward came to the throne. And the church became more Protestant. He was very young. I believe he was became king around when he was 9, and then he died when he was 15. Young monarch, obviously. So at this time, maybe something that's important to know too is, at this time in England, there was the monarch, but then there was also the parliament system. And so it kind of had this weird one foot in the monarch and then one foot in the parliament, where it's like the people had some way of having a voice, but not really. And so it kind of waffled back and forth, and that's another interesting fact about these times. So under Edward, because he was young, didn't have a lot of effect, or he didn't have a lot of power, so the Parliament had a lot more power. They were controlled a lot by Christian men. The Puritans were in there, and they kind of leaned it more Protestant. Church of England went more Protestant. And then a certain lady, after Edward passed, a certain lady called Mary the First took control. Another one of Henry's kids. And was she Protestant or Catholic? Catholic. Very not Protestant. Yes, because her mother, if I'm remembering this correctly, her mother was the one that Henry wanted to divorce. So if you are a kid and everything's going great, and then all of a sudden your dad says, "Screw it, I want a man, and so I'm going to divorce your wife, and I'm going to divorce your mother, and I want somebody else," that probably leaves a pretty bad taste in your mouth. And then because we're in Europe at this time, a bunch of different leaders of different countries are intermarrying and all this. So she has relatives who are Catholic. Of course, when she comes to power, she's like, okay, well, screw this Protestantism thing. I'm going to become Catholic. And I'm going to make the whole Church of England Catholic. And so now we just do this whole switcheroo where now, instead of the Church of England being Protestant, they're now Catholic. And guess what happens to all the Protestants? Snip, snip. Yeah. Snip, snip. This is Bloody Mary, if you're wondering. This is that time period. So she persecutes the Protestants, and that's really bad. But it forms who the Puritans are and the Protestants at this time. Don't get too self-righteous, because even though she persecutes the Protestants, after her, a Protestant persecutes the Catholics. So during this time period, it's whoever's in power is persecuting the other side. So lots of killing, lots of death, people trying to figure out what's going on. Under the reign of Bloody Mary, there's this man called John Foxe who writes a book called The Martyrs of the Protestants. And this, for Puritans, becomes kind of a very influential book, because in this book, it just relays stories of Protestants being persecuted by Catholics. And so the Puritans start thinking of themselves as kind of a persecuted group, and starts relating themselves to the nation of Israel in the Bible. And this happens a lot, actually, in church. Like when we get to North America, Jordan's going to talk about churches in North America, which is heavily influenced by the Puritans, right? This view of the group that you are in is kind of like the nation of Israel. You're being persecuted and you're going to the promised land. You're getting pulled out of Egypt. These ideas, it's actually quite easy for church. And I'm not actually necessarily making a critique and saying that in and of itself is bad. But that is just the frame of mind that these people are in, and you'll see that a lot in the rest of our North American discussion. So Puritans start to emphasize the covenants of God, specifically the covenant of grace, which for someone then becomes, or it leads you to, by personal faith, one could join the people of God. So when you look at the Bible as covenants, there's God's chosen people, there's God's people under the covenant of grace, and so they start pushing towards this idea of personal relationship leading to being under God's chosen people. Bloody Mary, or Mary the First's reign doesn't last super long. It's about 5 years. And then her younger sister, Elizabeth, comes to power. And is she Catholic or Protestant? Protestant. Does she let the Catholics live happily ever after? No, she does not. She persecutes them in return. Yeah. But Elizabeth is a lot, what would be the word? I don't want to say gentler, but is more democratic, a little bit more wise in how she handles leadership and communicating with the church. And so you can see her reign is actually for a long time. It's, what is that, 40-some years. That's a long time. And so she really, in that time period, sets the stage of what the Church of England is, solidifies it, and kind of, that's when the Church of England really just kind of settles down and goes, okay, we're Protestant, we're high church, here we are. She institutes the 39 Articles which define the Church of England's doctrine. It's during this time, though, that the people, there's a group of people that we are calling Puritans, start pushing back against the Church of England. So Church of England's very high church. So here's a question. If the EMC conference, well, actually, let's say, how would I word this? But I'm just going to say it's simple, we won't overcomplicate it. EMC conference says all our pastors now need to wear a vest, a black vest, with a blue tie, with an orange undershirt, every Sunday, okay? Every one of the churches in the EMC conference, the pastor has to wear that. Would we be fine with that? Would we do it? No big deal? No. Why? Is that against the Bible? Is there a place in the Bible that says you cannot wear a vest with a blue tie and an orange undershirt? It does not. So do you say yes or no? What's human nature to say no? Right. So here's the thing, though. You'd be afraid of it becoming law. Why? Legalism. Yeah. They can now control. So really your concern is who has the power. Yep.
If we see God as the supreme power, then we should be in relation to Him, and this sounds like someone else taking away that power.
It sounds that way, but is it? No, I'm just saying, right? Like we all say there's authorities on earth, and we all say that they should dictate something of what we do, right? We're not just freewheeling here, except for what we think God says in His Word. It sounds like a tradition. And so that exact idea is what Puritans started railing against. So under Elizabeth, there was what's called, if you want to look this up, the vestments controversy that went on for a long time. And that was her and the Church of England saying all ministers have to wear a certain thing. It has to be this uniformity across all the churches, all the parishes. They have to wear a certain outfit for that. And the Puritans were like, no, because of some of the things that we just said. Who has authority? All those types of things. Carolee. Uniformity. Literally, so the reason why she would do that, that's what Carolee was asking, the reason why she would do that is to unify the Church of England. Same reason why, like Catholics, or not the exact same reason, but if you're trying to bring uniformity to things, like if you're on a baseball team, you wear the same uniform because you're on the same team. Does that mean that you're all the same? No.
I'm just thinking something like this probably starts with some good reasons, right? So that's a little more difficult. Maybe all the pastors should wear a suit jacket so that people, similar that people know who's the caring person, who's the leader in this church. So we have a really good reason. It starts off probably with a good reason.
100%. And like your dad, when he pastored at that time period, would you not say, Mom, that he wore the suit and tie? Everybody, like that was the standard in Mennonite culture. The pastor wore a suit and tie. Now we're getting more relaxed on that. Now, is it better that we're relaxed, or should we go back? Or does it even matter? Yes, yep. The older colony Mennonites had vestments too.
Just a note on that, the old colony ministers, even during the work week, they wear a black shirt. So you can spot them a quarter mile away. Oh, that's a minister.
Probably not cool for them. That's sorry. Yeah, this is interesting stuff, right? And so this is the situation that the Puritans are in, and so the Puritans, right? They are starting to lean towards this idea of personal relationship. We're going to get to a little bit more of the baptism side of things, like. You can choose to become the people of God, and it's more personal. It's not so high church. It's getting rid of the stained glass windows. It's getting rid of the crucifixes. It's getting rid of these distractions, right? We've talked about this already in the Protestant movement. They're pushing towards this, but here's the Church of England holding to this high church model with Catholics kind of almost always coming back into view, and so they're trying to pull away a little bit. But so that's where we are there. Okay, after Elizabeth, we get to James the First, who holds a little bit more strongly to, or has a little bit of a heavier hand when it comes to the Church of England. Not too much. He still allows the Puritans, like at this point, Puritans are in the Parliament. Puritans are like saying a lot of things against the monarchy. They're like pushing against this authority. But James holds a little bit of a stronger hand, but he still allows the talk to happen. There's a lot of talk happening, not a lot of change happening. So he's allowing that to continue. One of the notes that we won't get into, but if you're interested to dig into this more, is what Bible do you think was made, like the translation made during the time of James the First? The authorized one. The best one, according to some. The only one, according to others. Has his name on it. King James. Yep. The King James Version. So that's a fascinating thing in and of itself. He allowed that translation to happen to kind of actually appease some of the Puritans. So one thing that's interesting about the King James Version is that there really is no commentary throughout the Bible. It's just the translation. Because at this point, there was obviously friction between the Puritans and the high church model folks on exactly what everything meant. And then you had Catholics and all this. And the Puritans just wanted a Bible. And so King James allowed them to have that Bible. I won't get into that, but there's a bunch there that you can dig into for yourselves. There was the Wycliffe Bible. I don't have those timelines all sucked in my head right now. First complete English Bible according to Jordan Saponsky. Okay. I just didn't want to put that weight on my shoulders. Thank you. No, sorry. Okay. Here's a little quote from James. And this just kind of just gives you a taste of what the view of the monarchy is and how it relates to the church. The state of the monarchy, this is King James speaking, so the state of the monarchy is the supremist. There it is the supremest thing upon earth. For kings are not only God's lieutenants upon earth and set upon God's throne, but even by God himself, they are called gods, lowercase g. So he's viewing this idea of kings as this supreme ruler placed there by God to rule. Which, if we go back to the Old Testament with King David, is that a good model? Can be. But Yes, I was going to verify this, and I'm not going to speak out of turn because I didn't specifically look this up, and I wanted to, and I forgot to. So I'm not remembering currently. I'm sure I read it at some point. I don't remember exactly his relation. Alrighty. During King James, there was this movement within the Puritan movement called the Separatist movement. And can you guess what they wanted to do? Stay together, yeah. Nope. They wanted to separate. Yeah. So if you want to kind of have a definition, Puritans, this is the point where we define Puritan. Puritans are Protestants who wanted to reform the English, or the Church of England from the inside out. And separatists thought, you know what? Just like good Christians do, we're just going to fully disengage, separate from the Church of England, and start our own pure church. Have you heard that one before? They started off by going to Holland. Some went to Holland, some went to Amsterdam. But after about 10 years, they realized they were disconnecting from their English roots, and they wanted to kind of reconnect, but they also didn't really want to go back to England. Again, just a reminder of what this looks like at this time. So during this kind of window of time, there were things called the 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, etc., etc. There's a lot of wars going on. What I'm saying is that there's tons of stuff going on in Europe, not a lot of peace, a lot of Protestants fighting Catholics. It's very fascinating, and you could spend hours just studying specific time points in this point in history. So the separatists wanted to get out, and what else had a kind of already happened during this era that almost pointed to, so they viewed themselves as God's chosen people under God's covenant. They are Israel. They are exiting Egypt. Right? Egypt is this England, Europe chaos of destruction and bitterness and frustration. Where do you go in this time period if you want to go to the promised land? The new world. America. The land flowing with freedom. America. So, this is where you get this connection to the ship called the Mayflower. If you haven't heard, that's a very big point in American history. The Mayflower goes from England to America and establishes the colony. But that's the Puritans. It's the separatists who are on that boat going to America, trying to get free from England, have their religious freedom, have the pure church, just like every other church in history. We are the pure church. Sorry, I'm making all these comments now. It's great. It's also during James that we get the very first English Baptist church. That is the first English Baptist church. And that is because some of the separatists started reading the New Testament in Greek. And what did they find? Believers were baptized. And can a kid believe according to them? Apparently not. So, we get Baptists who like to baptize believers. Does that sound like anything else? Sorry, this is just like it's all, you just see in church history, it's just a cycle of things. It's amazing. So, if you went down to the States and someone asked you, what is a Mennonite? How would you describe it as succinctly as possible? Baptized believers, that's one way to say it. That might confuse some of them. Remember, some of these Baptists are non-denominational. Pacifists? Sorry? Baptist pacifists, yes. So when I was down in the States and it was like, you're a Mennonite, what does that mean? I would say I'm a pacifistic Baptist. Because it's actually very similar. It's actually very similar, besides the fact that I'm a pacifist. Right? Because we believe in believer baptism. What do Baptists believe? Believer baptism. They believe kind of in this congregational model of leadership. We do it probably a little bit heavier, but it's the same idea. So you can actually see how these two groups, they actually are kind of separate from each other, but they come to the similar point in history where they believe the same things. So that's why we're so connected. Like, we listen to and watch and interact a lot with what we call the evangelical church, right, in North America, which is loosely, heavily, I would say heavily influenced by Baptist theology. And we kind of resonate with, like, we can go into a Baptist can come up here and speak theology, and we're all kind of, yeah, right? We all kind of hold the same views. And so we're actually kind of lumped in there, and it's just kind of interesting, right? We come from two very different points, but some of our theologies really connect. So, interesting fun fact. After James, we get Charles, and he's like, it is time for High Church Model 2.0. We're not Catholics, but we are going to be high church. We are bringing back stained glass windows. We are bringing back stone altars. Get rid of this wooden communion table. We're going full stone, full altar, the whole shebang. He was not as delicate or maneuvering as James and Elizabeth, and he just let her buck, and he ran into a lot of struggles. He turned to a man called William Laud, made him the archbishop, and Laud just let this Episcopalian opposition to the Puritans reign, and they just pushed really hard. And you know what happens when you push really hard and something gets persecuted? Often they define what they believe. And so in this time period, the Puritans define what is called the Westminster Confession of Faith. Does anybody have heard of the Westminster Confession of Faith? Another massive, important confession in church history that we, I think, as Mennonites would be very close to believing a lot of the same things. Like this is getting us close to that idea. Not everything, but very close. So, yeah. Another thing that's happening at this time, we're running out of time, is what's confusing or what makes this intermingled with history is that the Puritans aren't the only ones fighting against the monarchy under Charles. The rest of the people are starting to get fed up with Charles. So an interesting thing that was happening here is that the monarchs could not, if they needed money, they had to go to the parliament to request money, and the parliament would say yes or no and give them the money. And so you needed a good relationship between the monarch and the parliament to actually have the monarch be able to do what he wanted. There was a bunch of wars happening, so Charles needed money, but he didn't like the parliament at all and hated them. And so the parliament didn't want to give Charles money because the parliament was primarily made up of Puritans who hated the high church view of the Church of England. And so when they met together, guess what they talked about? They didn't talk about the money. They talked about whether we should wear vests as preachers, which annoyed Charles, which meant that he didn't convene the parliament. And so it was just frustrating. And the people, even apart from the Puritans, were getting frustrated with Charles because Charles was in all these wars and trying to spend money, and it's just a bunch of stuff that you can dig into, and I can't get into all of it right now. So what happened at the end of Charles' reign is after a number of wars or fighting, eventually he got captured and beheaded, and we have this window of time because it was what would be called the English Revolution happened, or not revolution, Civil War, sorry, the English Civil War. And then we had this brief moment of time which was called the Commonwealth. And this is where there's a time where there was no monarch in England, and they tried to run the whole of England as this like republic type model. But the problem is the whole setup of the government in England was set up to have a monarch. So they needed someone to fill that spot. So they did that. The person who filled that spot was Oliver Cromwell, who was named the Lord Protector instead of the monarch. Yay. Change. That didn't last particularly long. It had issues. And then Charles II eventually came back in. He was the King of Scotland at the time, restored the monarch, restored the Church of England, and reinforced a lot of the uniformity to the Church of England. So there's a brief window of time of the Commonwealth. We have 1 minute left. So some of the things that were influential, what affected us and affected who we interact with, because this is a very important thing, is Baptists come from this time period. So if you want to know about Baptists, this is the time period that they are formed, that whole movement begins. Congregationalists also accelerate in this time. A lot of the foundations of the evangelical North American church come from this Puritan movement. This idea of born-again believers comes from this time period. And then some of the views of the relationship between church and state, again, get clarified during this time period with the monarchs. So it's just an interesting couple steps where we go Catholic Church. We want to break from that because that's very heavily controlling everything. So we do the Reformation, which produces the Church of England. And then that still seems too controlling, so we break from that, and then we have kind of this Puritan separatist Baptist movement. So there's the few steps. That is all the time we have for today. If you need to leave, go ahead and leave. But is there any questions or thoughts on that? Does that make sense? That was a lot of me talking. King James and Elizabeth were cousins. That rings true in my mind. Yep. Oh, Darnell wore a suit every Sunday back in the day. Sounds like a vestment. Uh-huh.
So, when exactly did Puritans become a movement? Would that have been right at the beginning of Henry VIII?
I think it's very hard to define the beginning of the Puritan movement. It just organically happened within the Church of England, and it's kind of describing this range of beliefs and this pushback against the high church. And so I would probably put them, like it says, 1560 to 1660, in that range, there was signs of this Puritan movement. Yeah. If you ever hear me quote someone called John Owens, that's from this time period. John Owens is from this time period. He's a good theologian that I've appreciated in my life. Roughly. Yeah, it's 100 years, but roughly that's when the movement is. Yeah, you could think about it that way. Yeah, you could probably lay those over top of each other, where you would say we have the Roman Catholics, and then you have the Protestants, and from the Protestants you get the Anabaptists, and so it's like these two separations, and then you could say the same thing with the Church of England. So you have the Church of England, which has the Puritans, which are trying to reform the church from the inside, and then the Puritans have the separatists coming off of them going even further, separating from the Church of England. Yep. Right, yep.
In Eastern Europe, any evangelical church there is basically called Baptist. That's my impression. I've been confused about that. You're a Mennonite church, you call yourself Baptist, but it's the baptism is the point.
Okay, we'll leave it there. You can talk to me and Jordan if you want to have more deep talk about history. Go and have a great Sunday.